Hello, and welcome. Before you close your eyes tonight, I'm taking you to the misty hills of South America, into the shadow of a name that still lingers, Pablo Escobar. His story is a legend, how a bandit became a folk hero and then evolved into an international threat. If you're ready, dim the lights and lean back, because tonight, brutal history begins. Before the name Pablo Escobar became synonymous with cocaine, death, and global infamy, it belonged to a boy born into poverty, like thousands of others in Colombia. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949, in Rio Negro, a rural town near Medellín. His father was a farmer, his mother, a schoolteacher. But this wasn't a story of hope and hard work. Not for Pablo. From a young age, Pablo displayed a hunger for more than what the muddy streets and broken roofs of his hometown could offer. He wasn't content being invisible, just another face in the crowd. He wanted control. By the time he was a teenager, he was already forging school report cards, stealing tombstones to resell, and running small-time street hustles. This wasn't mischief. It was training. Pablo never completed college. He briefly studied political science and economics, but he didn't need a degree to understand power. For him, street logic was more valuable than classroom lectures. As the 1970s began, Colombia was entering a new phase of violence. Guerrilla movements, corrupt governments, and an exploding black market made it a haven for anyone ruthless enough to navigate it. Pablo saw the opportunity and dove in headfirst. He began with cigarette smuggling, then moved on to falsifying lottery tickets and stealing cars. Every move he made was bigger, bolder, and riskier. And every time, he won. But it wasn't enough. Soon, he discovered something far more lucrative than cigarettes or cars: cocaine. But that's a story for the next part. In the early 1970s, Medellin's night streets echoed with drunken yells, flashing switchblades, and blood-soaked sidewalks. Among this chaos walked a young man, Pablo Escobar, barely 20 years old. At first, he was a petty criminal: car thefts, small-time extortion, even kidnapping. His closest ally? His cousin, Gustavo Gaviria. For them, crime wasn't a game, it was business. Pablo was bold. He'd yank people out of their cars at gunpoint, re-register the stolen vehicles, and resell them. He was forging documents, bribing officials, and getting arrested, but using jail as networking space, not punishment. Alongside car theft, he ran protection rackets. It was simple: pay us so your car doesn't get stolen. And if someone didn't pay, the car would disappear by nightfall. He wasn't just making money, he was buying loyalty. Escobar gave stolen factory-new cars to friends, offering gifts not out of kindness, but to secure absolute allegiance. But in Medellin, money wasn't enough. Blood was the real currency. Pablo didn't hesitate to kidnap debtors, and sometimes, ransom or not, he ordered executions to set an example. In 1971, when he kidnapped wealthy businessman Diego Echevarria, the ransom was paid, but Diego still turned up dead. The poor saw Escobar as a vigilante, a Robin Hood. At this point, cocaine had not yet entered his empire. But the foundation of the Medellín Cartel was already being laid in the shadows, on the streets, and in blood. By the mid-1970s, marijuana and car theft weren't enough. Colombia's criminal underworld was about to discover its gold mine: cocaine. Escobar didn't just see cocaine as a product. He saw it as a revolution. He used pre-existing marijuana smuggling routes and partnered with figures like Carlos Letter and American pilot Giorgio. From Colombia, cocaine shipments flew to the Bahamas, then into Miami in radar-evading planes. When aerial routes became too risky, the operation adapted. Mules smuggled cocaine inside tires, electronics, even their own bodies. From Panama to Mexico, across the Texas border, Escobar's network sprawled across the Americas. He made 10% per kilogram shipped. If shipments were lost, The Colombian sales made up the losses. The profits were so absurdly high that by the 1980s, Escobar was flooding Colombia with American dollars. Thus, the Medellín Cartel was born. His allies? The Ochoa brothers, Rodriguez Gacha, Letter, and always Gustavo Gaviria. Together, they created a cocaine syndicate so structured, so vast, it ran like a Fortune 500 company. By 1985, Escobar owned 19 mansions in Medellín, dozens of planes and boats, multiple banks and shopping centers, and yes, a private zoo. Hacienda Napoles became his personal kingdom, with rhinos, elephants, zebras, and parties full of models and celebrities. It was excess incarnate. But behind the luxury stood violence. His rule was simple: plata o plomo. Take the silver or take the lead. Bribe or be executed. By now, Pablo had set his eyes on something even bigger: politics. By 1982, Pablo Escobar wasn't just rich, he was powerful. But he didn't want to rule from the shadows anymore. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted a seat in the Colombian Congress. To the poor, he was a hero, building houses, paving roads, funding soccer fields. So when he ran for alternate congressman, people cheered. And he won. As an alternate, he received full benefits: diplomatic immunity, government salary, official travel access. He even visited the White House with his wife and son. But his fame was a double-edged sword. Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla launched an investigation into Escobar's past. Soon, mugshots of Pablo's arrest were printed on front pages. His Robin Hood image shattered. Escobar tried to suppress the scandal, buying out newspapers, denying allegations, claiming his wealth came from construction. But it was over. Presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán kicked Escobar out of his party. The U.S. revoked his visa, and the Colombian Congress was preparing to strip his immunity. To Pablo, this wasn't just politics, it was war. He believed Lara was a puppet for U.S. interests. And so, on April 30th, 1984, motorbike gunmen pulled up next to Lara's car and opened fire. Lara was assassinated. The killing sparked a full-on state war against Escobar. And it wasn't just Colombia anymore. The United States, under President Reagan, declared the Medellín Cartel a national threat. Pablo Escobar was now the most wanted man in 2 countries. After Lara's assassination, Escobar fled to Panama. There, he met with dictator Manuel Noriega, who accepted a $4 million bribe in exchange for protection. In Panama, Escobar held meetings with top cartel leaders, Gacha, Letter, the Ochoas, to reroute trafficking operations. He even held secret negotiations with former Colombian President Alfonso López, offering, "I'll shut down coca farms and fund legal agriculture if you revoke extradition and pardon my past." But the deal failed. The U.S. refused. Colombia's elite was outraged. Then came the Barry Seal incident. Seal, an American pilot turned DEA informant, smuggled cocaine for Escobar while secretly filming everything. One photo captured Pablo himself loading cocaine onto a plane. Even worse, the handoff happened in Santanistra, Nicaragua, linking Escobar to communist factions during the Cold War. The U.S. now saw him not only as a drug lord, but a geopolitical threat. 2 years later, Escobar's men assassinated Barry Seal in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It was personal. The U.S. Embassy in Bogotá was bombed. American diplomats withdrew. Escobar's war had gone international. By now, Escobar's paranoia had a name: extradition. His motto: "A grave in Colombia is better than a cell in the U.S." In 1981, when Guerrilla Group M-19 kidnapped the Ochoa brothers' sister, the cartel retaliated. Escobar and Gacha formed a private army, MAS, death to kidnappers trained by Israeli and British mercenaries. They hunted leftist guerrillas like M19 and FARC, earning them temporary public approval as anti-communist patriots. But Escobar later betrayed the guerrillas, offering U.S. intel on them in a failed plea deal. In 1985, guerrillas stormed Colombia's Supreme Court, allegedly with Escobar's support. They demanded the end of extradition. During the siege, more than 100 people died, including nearly half the nation's top judges. Thousands of case files, including Escobar's, were destroyed. The law against extradition was shelved. Pablo had bought himself time, but the blood spilled would never be forgotten. From this moment forward, Washington labeled him enemy number one. By 1987, Pablo Escobar ruled through fear. But something had changed. He was losing control. The Cali Cartel, a rival empire run like a business, not a gang, was rising fast. Unlike Medellin's brute force, Cali preferred bribery, diplomacy, and quiet influence. Escobar noticed them creeping into his U.S. turf. New York, Miami, and he was enraged. Cali's response? Assassinate his people one by one. In 1988, a car bomb exploded outside Escobar's luxury building in Medellin. His son Juan Pablo was injured, nearly deafened. His men were killed. Pablo survived, and he wanted revenge. The first name on his list, Luis Carlos Galán, Colombia's leading presidential candidate. Galán was bold. He openly condemned Escobar and vowed to fight cartel influence. On August 18, 1989, during a campaign rally, Galán was shot dead on stage. Colombia plunged into chaos. Escobar then targeted Galán's successor, Cesar Gaviria, by attempting to blow up Avianca Flight 203, believing Gaviria was aboard. The bomb killed 110 people, including 2 Americans. But Gaviria had missed the flight. Now Escobar wasn't just a domestic threat. He had killed U.S. citizens. This gave the U.S. military legal grounds to intervene. In Colombia, the government launched a new offensive. A colonel named Hugo Martinez created a new elite unit, Search Block, trained specifically to capture or kill Escobar. But Medellin was Pablo's home turf. Locals warned him of police presence. Officers were ambushed. In the first 2 weeks, 30 of 200 agents were killed. Martinez refused to give up. He doubled his forces and led an assault on one of Pablo's rural safe houses. Escobar escaped, but the game had changed. He was no longer just facing cops. He was now fighting governments and his own collapsing empire. By 1990, Escobar had lost many of his closest allies. His cousin Gustavo Gaviria, his lifelong right hand, was killed. His brother-in-law Hernan Inau was arrested. Facing mounting pressure and fearing extradition, Escobar made a shocking move. He surrendered, but on his own terms. He struck a deal with President Gaviria. He'd go to prison if he got to build the prison himself. That prison became La Catedral. Built atop a mountain outside Medellin, it included a bar, disco, and jacuzzi, a soccer field and gym, private suites for guests, hidden armories, and escape tunnels. It was a fortress, not a prison. Pablo ruled comfortably inside, but paranoia crept in. One day, he summoned 2 cartel lieutenants, Moncada and Galeano, to La Catedral, accusing them of skimming profits. Both were murdered. The government, humiliated, tried to transfer Pablo to a real prison. In response, Escobar took a deputy justice minister hostage. The army was ordered to storm La Catedral. But when they arrived, Pablo was gone, escaped through a hidden tunnel in the jungle. He had vanished. The man who built his own prison had broken out of it. Under growing pressure and intense surveillance, Escobar struck a deal with the Colombian government in 1991 and surrendered. But this was no ordinary surrender. The government agreed not to extradite him to the United States, and Escobar would serve his sentence in a prison he designed himself, La Catedral. But this prison looked more like a mansion than a penitentiary. It included a soccer field, a bar, billiard tables, and luxury suites. Some even claimed that many of the guards were actually Escobar's own men in disguise. From inside La Catedral, Escobar continued running his cartel. He even summoned rivals to the prison, where he tortured and killed them. In 1992, when news of this scandal broke, Escobar managed to escape. That escape marked the beginning of the end. Now losing power and protection, Escobar was forced into a life on the run, along with his family. One of the most heartbreaking stories from this time comes from his daughter. According to Manuela Escobar, while hiding in a cabin high up in the Andes Mountains, her father burned nearly $2 million in cash just to keep her warm, so she wouldn't die from hypothermia. That moment revealed the dramatic contrast between Escobar's identity as a criminal and his instincts as a father. By 1992, Pablo Escobar was no longer a king. He was a fugitive, forced to move nightly between safe houses and Medellín slums. He lived like a ghost, paranoid, exhausted, and disconnected from his empire. But the deepest wound wasn't strategic, it was personal. His wife Maria Victoria and son Juan Pablo were now targets too. Desperate to escape Colombia, they sought asylum across the globe. But country after country said no. Argentina, Brazil, Spain, Germany, the United States. Every door slammed shut. Eventually, the German government refused them entry mid-flight, and the family was deported back to Colombia, where they were immediately detained by authorities. For Pablo, this was the final straw. He issued new threats. Bombs exploded. Judges and officials were killed. And in response, the state unleashed something far more brutal than law enforcement. They created a vigilante death squad, Los Peeps, persecuted by Pablo Escobar. This group included families of Escobar's victims, former cartel members, Cali Cartel allies, and allegedly ties to the CIA and Colombian intelligence. Their mission? Burn down Escobar's world. They started with his lawyers, then his accountants, then his drivers, bodyguards, cousins. One by one, they were tortured, executed, bombed, or disappeared. In just weeks, Pablo lost the vast network that had once protected him. From 3,000 loyal soldiers to a handful of desperate men. He now lived in abandoned homes, changed disguises daily, and used radio scanners to track government movements. But he made one fatal mistake. He couldn't stop calling his family. He missed his son. He worried for his mother. And each call, even 1 minute long, was enough for intelligence to triangulate his location. Multiple raids followed. Each time, he narrowly escaped. But the noose was tightening. Even his own men began questioning him. They no longer believed in his survival. They no longer wanted to die for his pride. The legend was crumbling. Escobar wasn't a boss anymore. He was a burden, and he knew it. December 2nd, 1993. Medellín. Pablo Escobar is 44 years old. That morning, he spoke with his son by radio. He laughed. He cried. He told his son he loved him, but he stayed on the line too long. Colombian intelligence, with American NSA support, locked in the signal. Coordinates were relayed to the search block. Special forces surrounded a modest house in the Los Olivos neighborhood. Gunfire erupted. Escobar grabbed a mini Uzi and tried to escape across the rooftops. He was hit in the leg, torso, and finally a bullet entered through his ear. Was it police fire? Or did Escobar, as his family insists, pull the trigger himself to avoid capture? We may never know. What we do know is this. The man who once ruled a multi-billion-dollar empire died on a dirty rooftop, shoeless, bloody, hunted. Photos of his corpse, bullet-ridden and sprawled across a rooftop, spread across the world the next morning. But even in death, Pablo Escobar divided a nation. Some wept, some celebrated. Thousands gathered at his funeral. To some, he was a monster. To others, a martyr. To all, he was unforgettable. Pablo Escobar is dead, but the world he helped shape, the violence, the power, the drugs, remains very much alive. Thank you for watching. A final note from Brutal History. If you made it to the end of this story, you've traveled deep into the darkest layers of modern history. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments. Was Pablo Escobar a criminal or just a product of the system? Until next time, I sleep with history. This is Brutal History, signing off.